Okay, we're going to get into our lesson today. We are starting a new month, and so we have a different focus for the You Asked For It series. We've changed focuses each month. We've talked about dating and marriage and confusing life questions and things we believe in churches of Christ. The month of September, we're talking about navigating difficult relationships, and I've titled this one Overcoming Rejection because a lot of the questions which were submitted kind of alluded to how do you go on after a big disappointment in life, whatever that may be. And I figure most people are talking about maybe dating or jobs, but we're going to talk about it in several different aspects today and kind of group them together. But thinking about rejection, just want to start with this. This should be obvious, but just a reminder, rejection is not easy, but rejection is expected. We're all going to face things in life where things don't go our way, and we have a lot of disappointment. And when that happens, it's tough. But don't think that you are unusual in this or that why are things not working out for me yet, because we all are rejected in different ways at different times for different reasons. And sometimes for some of us, rejection lasts longer than for others. But it is certainly part of the experience of life. It's not easy, but it is expected. Okay, so what I want to do today, I've kind of got it in two different categories. I figured for most of us in this room, talking about rejection, I think if I understood the question correctly, it's in line with careers and dating. So we're going to talk about that first. But then I also want to talk about being rejected when we try to share our faith, because hopefully you will experience that frequently in your life, of trying to tell someone about what you believe and them not being interested. So we'll talk a little bit about how to handle that when that happens. But first, overcoming rejection, whether it be in dating or in seeking a new position, new career, new company, you go for the interview and it doesn't work out and you're crushed. And you have to deal with that. How do we deal with that as God's people? So here's some things to keep in mind about overcoming rejection in your profession and in relationships. First thing I'd offer to you is maybe there's something good you can learn from that situation. Listen to some feedback that could be helpful. Maybe you weren't ready for that position and you hear something in the rejection that will help you be ready for the next position. Or maybe you go through a breakup and hopefully the person who ends the relationship with you is honest enough with you to say, hey, here's why this didn't work out. And maybe this will be a problem for you in future relationships if it's not at least addressed or improved upon. And that's a very biblical idea. Proverbs 15, the writer says, he who listens to a life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise. And he who ignores discipline despises himself. But this line's important. Whoever heeds correction gains understanding. So if you're told no, if you're turned down, one thing that you should be doing is saying, is there some legitimacy to why I didn't receive whatever I was looking for? There may be. And maybe I need to take some mental note of that. Maybe not. Maybe it just wasn't the right time, or the person that you were discussing this next step with, whether it be in a relationship or a promotion or a new job, maybe they did not see who you are or what you can bring. But there's a chance you can learn from that situation. Secondly, I would say don't panic. Your time will come. It will. And Solomon talks about this in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There's a time for every season in life. There's a time for every activity under heaven. And he goes through a lot of different things. There's a time to mourn. There's a time to dance, time to move, time to stay, time to fight, time to stay at peace. Your time will come. No right now does not mean no forever. So I would encourage you, if you're here today and you're like, I haven't found someone that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with yet, don't panic. That doesn't mean you never will. If you're in a job right now and you're trying to get out of that job for another job and no one's hired you yet, don't panic. Something else will come along. Don't panic. Your time will come. And the last thing, going with these others I would mention, is remember that no job, no relationship, no person, no company is the source of your true identity. That's not where you find your value. And if you try to find your value in those things, you're always going to be left disappointed. Galatians chapter 2, Paul says, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but it's Christ who lives in me. That's my identity. It's Christ living in me. And he says, the life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So if it's dating, if it's a new job, it's not working out yet, see if there's something you can learn. There may be some ideas for some improvement. Your time's coming. Don't panic. There's more life left to live. And remember who you are. Remember where you find your true identity. I want to say a few more things, though, on that true identity point. You know these things already, but just some reminders, because the world wants to discourage you. Satan wants to discourage you. Who are you as a human being? What is your true identity? You've been created in God's image. Every single person in the world has been created in God's image. You have value. And if you find yourself saying, I don't like the way that I look, I'm embarrassed by my appearance, to a certain extent, what you're saying is, I don't like the way God looks. Because you've been created in his image. Now, are there things we can do to take care of our bodies? Yes. I'm not getting into that. But you as a person, the gender you have, the way you were designed, is exactly who God wanted you to be. Believe in that. Trust in that. God has great things planned for you you haven't even considered. I love Ephesians 2:10. Read that later today. I'll quote it for you, but really read the whole chapter of Ephesians chapter 2. Verse 8, he tells us how we're saved. We're saved by grace through faith. But then he says in verse 10, the reason he saved each and every one of us is God prepared in advance things that he wants you to do in this life. He already knows how you're going to serve his kingdom. He already knows how you're going to grow in your faith. That has already been planned out for you, and it's your job as a saved creature to participate in that divine plan. God has some incredible things ready for you. You don't see them right now, but that doesn't mean they aren't there. Hang on to that. And if right now is not going the way you want it to go, it doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. Last one, Romans 8:28. I hope you know that verse or have it memorized. Let's see how it goes. God works all things together for the what? For the good for those who what? Love him. Not everything that happens in your life is good. But even in a terrible situation, if you remain faithful, if you continue to love God, he will make good come from tragedy or disappointment. That's your identity. Someone who's been created in the image of God. Someone who has a great future ahead of them that you haven't even thought about. Someone who is loved so much by God that he will make good come from it. That's who you are. And if someone doesn't, or if they won't see that value, it's their loss. You're better off. I know it's hard to remember that when life's discouraging, but it's true. If someone can't recognize you as a child of God who has been created in the image of God, if someone can't recognize that you have great things ahead of you, if someone can't understand that God's going to work all things together for good in your life and in theirs, you don't want to be with that person. You don't. You don't want to be with a company like that. You don't want to have a boss like that. And if you're rejected by someone who doesn't see the value that you bring, like Craig said at the beginning, you may not see it right now, but you'll look back one day and you'll say, man, that's a real blessing that didn't work out. That is your true identity. All right, let's talk a little bit about sharing our faith. Because this one, again, whether we're single or married or old or young or middle-aged, hopefully we all experience this to a certain extent. You're probably familiar with this passage, Mark chapter 6. I think this is a great story. Jesus is raised in Nazareth. He comes back home once he begins his ministry to do some teaching, and it does not go well. This is Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. It says, Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. And when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things, they asked. What's the wisdom that has been given him, that he even does miracles? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. And Jesus said, here's the line of significance. Only in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own house is a prophet without honor. We'll get to that more in just a second, but I want to stop and ask you a couple questions. Why do you think people reject us, generally speaking, when we try to share our faith? Why do we experience that rejection? Okay, they don't want you bringing attention to things that they could be doing wrong. Good point. What else, James?
Just familiarity breeds contempt.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What else, Brandon? Right, and that's the postmodern world, especially we're living in. I'm going to do what I do, you do what you do. You stay on your side of the street, I'll stay on my side of the street. How dare you even insinuate that I'm wrong? I'm going to leave you alone, leave me alone, because I have my truth and you have your truth, right? Okay? Maybe one more. Yes, ma'am. Oh, good one. Good one. You see that here, right? They say, wasn't he a carpenter? Wasn't he one of us? I mean, he was out building till sun went down just like we did. He's got calluses on his hands. Now he thinks he's some theologian sitting in an ivory tower or coming back here to Nazareth. Who does he think he is, right? Some things to draw out of here about sharing your faith. And again, I want to make clear, I hope you experience this multiple times in your life, because if you experience this type of rejection in your life, you're doing something right. You're not supposed to always be successful when you talk with someone about their faith. Hold on just a second, James. I'll get right back to you. James mentioned this one, but I do believe you can be too close to a situation or a person to be effective. And sometimes they need to hear it from someone who is not as close to them, either biologically or emotionally. You see this all the time. Parents with their children, the children don't always listen to their parents, but maybe someone at church or a youth minister, they are able to influence the child in a certain direction. Because, what'd you say, familiarity breeds contempt, right? When there's a little bit of a buffer, at times you can be more effective. Not always, but that's one reason why sometimes we face rejection in sharing our faith. Someone might be jealous of how our lives are going. Kind of to Kim's point, a little bit different. You know, Kim was saying, well, we knew you before, and who are you now? But also, maybe you've experienced this internally and you've never admitted it, but if you see someone else, just everything going well in their life, they're married, I'm not married yet, they got the job, I didn't get the job, they went to the college I wanted to go to, they've had kids, I haven't been able to have kids, everything's great in their life, and so if they even begin to talk with me about how to change my life, I don't want to hear any part of it. Now, why don't I want to hear any part of it? I'm not going to admit it, but really it's because I'm jealous. I'm jealous that my life hasn't worked out like theirs. I'm going to come up with another reason, but that's really the reason, is I have some bitterness or some animosity toward them. I have to believe the people of Nazareth felt that way a little bit about Jesus. Nazareth was not the place where you wanted to be raised. It was on the wrong side of the tracks. It wasn't down south in Jerusalem. It wasn't in the nicer parts of Galilee. Jesus had grown up in that situation. He had gone away from home. He'd come back, and they're thinking, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? You think you're better than we are. But I do want to point out here that even in Nazareth, not everyone there did reject Jesus. And not everyone's going to reject you. Look there at that first line. Many who heard him were amazed. So not all of them said, don't talk to us. Many of them were amazed. So don't think, even if, percentage-wise, when you begin to share your faith, you experience more no's than yeses, that it's always going to be 100% no. There's a very good chance there will be people who are interested in what you have to say. Y'all familiar with John Maxwell? Yes, raise your hand. I know. Craig's met him on occasion. John Maxwell is a leadership expert. Used to be a minister, a Presbyterian minister. But if you've never read any of John Maxwell's books, I encourage you to buy. They're all great. But John Maxwell has a line he uses a lot with leaders. I'm not totally sure it's original with him, but John Maxwell says, if you don't want to be criticized, say nothing, be nothing, do nothing. Then everyone will like you. But as soon as you begin to speak up or make a change or set the standard for what should be done, that's when people start saying, who do you think you are? So if you never want to be rejected in sharing your faith, I would say, don't share your faith. But Jesus would say, you have to share your faith. That's a command. When Jesus says, go into all the world and make disciples, that's not a recommendation. It's not the great suggestion. It's the great commission, right? This is expected. This is how you're going to live. If you don't want to experience rejection, then just disobey Jesus. But you will experience rejection in sharing your faith. Jesus did too, but then again, not everyone rejected what he had to say. One more passage, and then I'll open it up for you to ask whatever questions you want to ask. This is from Jesus. He sends out his apostles 2 by 2. They go for the journey with nothing with them, no money, no extra clothes. But he says, when you're on this journey, if anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that home or town. I tell you the truth, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. I think Jesus would say, and I'm interpreting his words this way this morning, there comes a time when you have to realize I'm not making any headway and I'm wasting time here. I need to go somewhere else. Life is too short to continue to work with the same person or same situation when there's other people who need to hear about what you believe. That doesn't mean you give up on that person. It just means life's uncertain. The Lord could come back tomorrow. And there's more people out there who need to hear about him. And if I don't go seek those people because I can't leave this situation, I don't know if I'm being faithful to the call of God either. There comes a time when you have to shake the dust off your feet and just realize that's part of life. It's not easy, but it is expected. Okay, we got a little bit more time today. So whatever questions or comments you want to make concerning this, if you don't have any, we'll end a little early, but let's keep talking about it. Okay. So how do you turn someone down or terminate someone in a godly way is what you're asking. He's like, I would say with relationships, when you end a relationship, you need to be clear as to why. Don't leave someone guessing. You know, why did this end? Was it me? Was it you? When did things get off track? I think it's only fair to that person. Back to what we had said earlier about there's room for possible improvement. Here's why this relationship in my mind ended. And I just want you to know so you don't worry about it for several months after, or maybe you can improve on the other side. On the professional standpoint of letting someone go, I think you always thank them for what they had done for that company or that position. Be very clear with them as to why this termination is taking place. Thank you, Craig. Go ahead and shut that down. Be very clear as to why the termination is taking place, what they can learn, what they can improve on. And if I can be a resource for you in the future, let me know. Now, what I don't think is good is, and companies do this a lot, of we're going to let you go, but we're happy to, recommend you to someone else. Well, then, if you're happy to recommend me, why are you letting me go? But you do hear that a lot, and I think that's just to make themselves feel better. So if you're ever in a position where you're firing someone, don't don't do that. I think that's offensive. But care for them as individuals. That's a dangerous question for me to answer. Okay, so I would say, let me just start by saying, I would not be looking for someone in the world to date. My first place I would look would be a Christian. That may not lead to a relationship because there may not be people in your sphere of influence at the time who are Christians. But I've said numerous times in classes, and I'll say again today, I do not think that marriage, which is the reason why you date, to find out if you can marry them. If that's not why you're dating, don't date. But the reason you date is to find out if I should marry them. Marriage was never designed to be a mission field. Never. It's not why God created it. If that's what happens, praise God. Wonderful. And there are stories like that everywhere of people who came to the Lord because of someone that they were dating. Most of the time, that's not how it works. And so I would not date someone hoping that I can lead them to Christ. I would look for a Christian first. I think a great example of that's John chapter 4, when Jesus is with the woman at the well, Samaritan woman. They talk about a lot of things before they ever talk about faith. They talk about life. They talk about carrying water. They talk about customs. They talk about the difference between the Samaritan people and the Jewish people. The last thing they talk about is worship, the very last thing. But they build that connection first. And he even says, I know you've had 5 husbands. And I know the woman, the man you're living with right now is not one of them. And she's like, oh, how'd you know that? Well, that opened up another conversation. So, yes, I think there's times you have to build credibility and friendship and relationship before you dive into faith. I will say, don't ever be apologetic, and I don't think you ever would be, but just generally speaking, don't ever be apologetic for offending someone because of what you believe. I think at that point you back down from what you believe, and I think that's kind of against what Peter talks about in 1 Peter 3 about always be prepared to give an answer for the hope you have. You may have been prepared, but you didn't give the answer, and that's not good either. I've mentioned this in sermons before, but, when I play golf on the weekends, many times golf courses are busy on the weekends, and I'm paired up with people I don't know. And without fail, about the 6th or 7th hole, people say, what do you do for a living? And for the last 5 holes, they've been using profane language and telling off-color jokes. And then I tell them what I do for a living, and it's awkward for everybody because they either step back like a grenade went off, or they suddenly become extremely spiritual, and they want to talk with you about, their favorite Bible verses or their church. And so confession time, there have been so many times when I've heard these off-color jokes and people are like, what do you do for a living? I've so badly wanted to say, I sell insurance, or I'm in real estate, or I'm a banker, or whatever. But to this day, I've never done it. I've wanted to. But I feel like if I had, I would have felt awful after the day was over. And usually when people find out that, they'll say, well, I have noticed you haven't used any profane language. And that may be the extent of the conversation. But at least on that day, that made an impression on them. How big of an impression? I don't know. But I feel like that's at least being faithful to that opportunity. I've never on a golf course, though, been like, here's water. What keeps you from being baptized? We got to keep playing. So you just got to use judgment. These are all really good questions. Next Sunday, we're going to talk about whoever submitted this idea. Great question. It's a really interesting year to submit it. We're going to talk about disagreeing respectfully. How do we do that as God's people? Do you think people disagree respectfully in the world today? No. So how do we do that? How do we learn to disagree, hold our conviction, but do it respectfully? Have a great week. Hope to see you back here tonight, 6 o'clock. Take care.